Hey, John Gilroy here. Everyone knows not to build a house on a weak foundation. Today, let's look at cyber foundations and see how to improve them. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, a podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. This is a special edition of the podcast. We are recording this at the offices of Fortreum in Lansdowne, Virginia. This is our second of 3 interviews, and this one focuses on the foundations of strong and resilient cyber defense. Our guest is Ben Scudera, Senior Director for Cyber Defense and Readiness at Fortreum. Wow, start at the foundation here. Best place to start, huh, Ben?
That's right. Yep. So we figured there's a key set of security requirements that most organizations are going to want to set to get their organization in a strong security posture. And we're looking to give some information about how an organization can find the right set that fits their maturity. You know, I go to Google and look for information. Some I believe, some I don't believe. And especially with AI, may not want to hold on to that very carefully. However, I think the typical figure that is quoted in the business comes from our friends at IBM. And they say in 2024, the average breach cost $5 million. I mean, seems like a big number for a breach, doesn't it? Or is that too small? Maybe it's too low. Well, so it's the average breach, but what you'll find is, that can be crippling for a small or medium business, right? They don't have the ability to even really handle that, not to mention the reputational impact. So, direct costs of a breach can be that, or they can be higher.
So, Ben, I'm going to promote you. You're going to be CEO of ABC Company. ABC Company does $200 million a year in sales. And so you look at everything before you start with the company. You probably look at competition. You look at the financial structure of the company. You look at risk for the financial part of the company. But I think cybersecurity risk should be part of the general approach to evaluating a company's business capability. And so where would you start? Okay, you're a brand new CEO. Where would you start?
Right. No, it's a great question. The key, as you said, is to first really define the organization. So understand the size and complexity of the organization, what offerings they have, which kind of falls into what industry they sit in. So, an organization that's doing SaaS, providing it to some corporations might be less of a target for threat actors than an organization that maybe works with very sensitive data from the U.S. government, right? So trying to understand what data and use cases they have, and then look at critical systems. So as you said, there are going to be assets within each organization that if they're infiltrated, if there's downtime, there's going to be a financial or reputational impact with those. So once you've really locked in on what the scope should be, which is where your priorities would lie as a CEO or CISO, or really any role in security, then you can start to understand what defense in depth measures you have. And that really plays into the different levels of maturity for the cybersecurity controls that you might want implemented.
My brother-in-law worked for a big insurance company, and he had an MBA from Dartmouth. No one believed a word he said until he got his actuarial degree. Then he was gold. And I'm sure that if we got old Ed on the podcast here, he'd have every number in the book. How much percentage you spent for this? How much percentage for this? And this industry, this percentage, that. And believe me, he would dazzle you with the numbers. So let's dazzle me with the numbers. What's Tom Cruise say? Show me the money. So what percentages here should your annual cybersecurity spend be? And is there any rule of thumb for this?
So there is, there's a lot of research that's been done on this topic. Firstly, starting with the annual recurring revenue of a company. You mentioned earlier $200 million count in retail and e-commerce. We're looking at $250,000 to $1 million in spend for cybersecurity specifically. Now, the key point there is that it's not overall IT spend. That's not talking about legal or procurement or other somewhat ancillary services within an organization that support the cybersecurity story. But specific cybersecurity spend is usually about half a percent to 2%. And so across industries, you'll find that can change, especially, technology or SaaS. It's usually a bit higher than that. where that percentage can rise to the 2 or 3% mark, especially with a higher consideration for regulated environments. So to go through a specific regulatory framework, have staff to support that, GRC staff, specific controls or higher licensing to be in regulated environments of your external providers, and then have external auditors come in, all have prices associated with it. So industries that have a higher expectation of those activities are going to have a higher percentage spend.
Ben Scudera, you're a successful executive at ABC Company. You spend 2% a year in cybersecurity, and you seem to get by. All of a sudden, I'm going to get a recruiter. I'm going to recruit you to run John's Healthcare, and John's Healthcare is dealing with personal healthcare information. All of a sudden, risks got to change. And so it's one thing to sell donuts or tires, another thing to actually hold customers' private information. So do the numbers change with something more sensitive like that?
They certainly do. One of the factors that we look into is which if any, regulated environments you might need to maintain. So in the sense of healthcare, you might have HIPAA or high trust as an expectation from your downstream clients or or patients or whatever the group is that might have expectations to protect their PHI. And so not only is that going to increase the security controls required for the systems that might store, process, maintain medical records, but then that's also going to increase the expectation for the security controls in place that would protect those systems. So that might be in the case of bringing in a whole new feature or function set through a new tool or offering that you need to protect that data, but it might just be up-leveling the existing process to happen more frequently than it might otherwise.
So Ben, I got up early this morning and went to the computer and started doing some research on Fortreum, Fortreum.com. And on the website, it has something called a cyber foundation. Okay, cyber foundation. I love to quote my buddy Simon Sinek. He always says, we start with why. And I don't know if Aristotle started with why, but you start with why. So why did you create the cyber foundation here for Fortreum?
So there was a few reasons. One is we saw the need for it. I mean, we had organizations coming to us that simply didn't understand what their expectations should be for their level of maturity or their industry. They wanted help to understand what good should look like. And then they wanted to be able to understand what their current state was, to understand what their roadmap should be to get to where they ought to be as an organization. So we found that organizations were coming to us with that need. We also work with quite a lot of companies that are larger organizations and have a regulated environment where they've implemented these things, but they haven't thought about it elsewhere. They haven't thought about it in their commercial environment or their corporate environment. And we wanted to be able to share with them information about which security controls or which processes or technologies would give them the most value for the money that they would have to spend, and what the right alignment to that industry or size of their organization, so that they could find that right fit.
I love me some compliance, and I love me some checklists. I'm a man of many checklists, but sometimes there's a weakness in that process. I would imagine if you're evaluating a company and you walk in there, get out your little checklist and go down the list, you might need something more powerful than that, huh?
Absolutely. So, checklists might back some of this information, right? That might be the most detailed view of a line item by line item. But the reality is, especially with the Cyber Foundation service, a lot of it is telling the right story for leadership to understand why it's important to make certain levels of investment within cybersecurity. So the deliverables, collateral, outcomes of that sort of engagement are really important to speak to executive leadership. And we found that, traditionally that's not going to be a spreadsheet. So to summarize for them some of the key issues that were discovered, as well as some of the potential outcomes and the impact on their business if those outcomes were to occur, is really critical. And then to help them prioritize. So not necessarily just give them this is a high issue, but tell them based on what they might need to do to fix that issue, what might be a piece of low-hanging fruit for them, and allow them to build out a roadmap that sets the tone for the rest of the organization about what the priorities are.
So Ben, I'm going to Utah in August, and this place we're going to gives away T-shirts, and they say small, medium, or large. Well, yeah, I get maybe a medium or large if I'm feeling like a tough guy or something. When you look at companies, you could almost put them into categories as small, medium, and large, or maybe different rates of vulnerability. One might be a simple product. One might be handling personal information. Then another might be handling some sensitive federal information. So are there general categories that maybe a listener can consider and maybe put themselves in?
So there are. I mean, what we've tried to do is track this across industry because as you were just stating, there are different expectations based on the industry as well as based on the data that might be common for that industry. So what we end up looking at, a lot of what we've tied cyber foundations to is the CIS Top 18 has different levelings, level implementation group 1, 2, and 3. Those levels are tied to new requirements or new parameters on the same requirements based on the maturity of the organization. It's a good way for us to help a company understand where they need to be today, but also as they project their growth and want to plan for potentially hiring in full-time employees with a cybersecurity focus or bring in new tooling or up-level their current tooling to make that plan to make some jumps between levels or at least specific to certain tools or technologies within those levels.
And you may start a company and it may be at one level and Ben would come in and say, well, guess what? You have everything that's appropriate for your level. But what happens when you scale or something goes crazy? You double or triple sales. I mean, some companies can 10X in a year. All of a sudden, risk management profile changes completely.
Exactly. And it really is about risk appetite. So, companies are going to have to understand what their risk appetite is and what their clients' risk appetite is. And they have to also be prepared for changes. So changes could come in the form of a new contract where they now have a new expectation from a regulated environment perspective. It could come from them making an acquisition or potentially being acquired by a company that has different policies or expectations themselves. And then, lastly, it could just come from organic growth and they get to a place where the impact of a cybersecurity event outweighs the risk they're willing to take on not being prepared.
And I think people don't realize the risk they're in. I think they're being naive in many situations where they never realize something like that. And I think with some companies, there may be, let's just say, individuals on the board that are not as young as other individuals and may just put their feet up on the table and say, well, we haven't been attacked, so nothing's going to happen in the future. So someone like you has to go into the board and say, grab them by the tie and go, listen, bad things are happening.
Right. A great example would be over the last decade, ransomware has become more and more well understood. And that's a place where organizations realized too late that the defense in depth measures they had to prevent that weren't in place or weren't effective enough. And so to be able to detail how as an example, an attack like that could impact their organization would potentially either stop their ability to serve their customers, lose critical information that might have a reputational impact, and the business outcomes of that especially for small and medium businesses, there isn't that understanding that it could be a existential threat for them, that a single cybersecurity incident, if not correctly prepared for, essentially could end their business, or at least set them back years, right? And so a lot of that is finding the right way to provide that message without it coming across as a scare tactic, but really is something that needs to be thought through. Again, weigh the risk of the decisions that are being made and take any opportunity for an easy win to implement something that's going to be a stronger security measure.
I would imagine that if you're a company that at the top of their game, let's say, they may treat security as maybe a strategic asset, as part and parcel of the company and maybe even its brand identity, huh? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're right. We haven't really gotten into that as much. Essentially, as you rise up these maturity ranks, the part that cybersecurity plays in an organization changes. So we've talked a little bit about regulated environments. I mean, that alone can be a business driver. Breaking into a new industry, being able to show that you've got your certification or authorization and enable your sales leadership or sales executives to have, a piece of paper that they can show to people. But beyond that, the reputation of having a strong cybersecurity program, having more than the basics covered, having transparent communications, especially for organizations who sit in a space that relies on, government interaction or plays a role in another organization's security posture. So maybe as a downstream vendor, those sorts of capabilities can really become a selling point for them.
You mentioned the CIS controls earlier. And I would imagine if I ran a company and I had 3 consultants come in and give me 3 different opinions, and it was just rambling personal opinion, it wouldn't have any value to me. But I think you talked about these 18 controls a couple of times. That is something specific. Finally, I can hang my hat on that. If Ben comes in and says, I look at your company, and if you look at these 18 controls, here's the analysis of this, this, and this, and at your point right now, but you might want to consider this. At least it's something to start the discussion with, isn't it? I mean, I think CS has tools to take a look at what your risk posture is right now, don't they?
They do. Yeah. So especially system to system, there's going to be configuration hardening tools. But in a broader sense, looking at the CIS top 18 is going to look at different metrics across broader categories that touch not only on the technologies, but also policy, procedure. And what's really interesting about it is, as you said, it defines a metric. It tells you if you should be doing something especially at a certain, as I mentioned earlier, those different implementation groups, but it will tell you if you should be doing it and at the frequency or stringency of which you should be doing it. So it gives you a really firm understanding of an industry best practice. That's something that's nice to be able to use as a reference point.
And I don't want to put the listeners to sleep here, but if you take a look at some of these reports that can be generated, it really boils down exactly what you have to worry about. And they get very, very specific. You talk about board level cyber reports. It talks about MFA coverage, talks about IT source coverage, threat informed testing, penetration testing. I mean, this is really a classic point by point approach to make sure that the risk you're acceptable is appropriate for your level of business, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And again, kind of back to the earlier point about getting out of the spreadsheets, it gives a high enough level view that you're able to talk about security topics, not specific line items in a spreadsheet, but talk about some of the indicators that an organization may or may not be meeting what should be their own obligation of a mature cyber program based on their company.
With many phishing attacks, what they'll do is they'll encrypt data. And I guess at the first level, your system should at least have backups as one of the checklist items. But at the next level, it probably should have something like an immutable backup, which can be one defense against, encrypting data. But if you don't even realize that companies are being attacked every single day and their data is being encrypted and they are paying millions of dollars every single day to try to recover some of that data. It's one of the best kept secrets in town. I mean, ransomware is being paid every day, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, it is. I mean, even to the point that it's become, industry driven, where especially in the healthcare space, where that data is worth so much and is so highly valued and needed to be protected, that these organizations can't lose it. So they are forced to pay, and they don't have the right security measures in place. Even simple measures that might help a organization understand a phishing campaign, like a flag that says this is from an external sender, even if it looks like it's not, or phishing campaign training, right? So to have a kind of a white hat type of an approach where you have phishing campaigns put against your people, you can see who failed it and give that person dedicated training, help them understand what indicators they should be looking for that might tip them off that something is a malicious attempt. So to find those ways to combat that, and especially to then tie that to, again, the industry that a company is in, where you might be able to say, hey, you're getting a lot of outbound or external emails. You might want to pay attention to this because your people are going to need training for this. You're going to want to be able to find that they understand what indicators they should look like. If they get an invoice, they need to know how to make sure that it's real, right? So it's something that we're doing our best, working with many of our partners to help even just educate, again, get content out there that allows for folks to really have a better understanding.
Ben, when you were in diapers many, many years ago, I used to watch commercial television, and they had this guy named Ron Popeil, and he used to sell this thing, you set it and forget it. And I think there are executives out there that would bring someone like you in, and they do a thorough analysis. You'd have a risk posture, you know exactly what, and they would put it on the shelf and forget about it. But this is, the word's continuous, and you've used this a couple of times because, business is continuously changing. They're growing, they're getting new customers, losing existing customers. They're adding new staff. Every time you bring in someone, you're bringing in a new risk profile, aren't you? Mm-hmm. And so this is a continuous operation where, okay, it's July of 2025. You seem to be good now, but in 4 months, it could all be upside down.
Exactly. So that touches a lot on the process piece of this, where especially as the organizational maturity increases, the frequency of these defensive events should also increase. So access reviews, incident response, testing, any sort of recurring audit or red team penetration tests, those sorts of activities should happen more and more frequently. And one of the jobs of these companies, especially the leadership within these companies, and somewhat to an extent outside consultants or whoever they might bring in to support them, is to make sure that those activities are happening and that the results of those activities are not just sitting on a shelf, as you said, but are actually becoming actionable. That there's improvements being made by these companies, by the teams within the company, that they're tracking places where they're deficient, and there's a structured plan to improve it.
So, Ben, if you want to get more information, I think people can go to Fortreum.com, Cyber Foundations, Fortreum.com, Cyber Foundations. Now is a crystal ball question for you. I've dealt with a lot of humans over the years, and many times humans have to be persuaded in a manner that is shocking. Don't touch the stove. Don't touch the stove. And so what do you think in the next 5 years? Do you think enough executives are finally going to understand the threat they're under just being in business to being attacked and having their data encrypted and having to pay a ransom? Or I think bad things going to have to happen for people change.
Unfortunately, I agree with you on that part of it. For better or for worse, bad things have been happening for a number of years now. So there is, I would say, more traction than 5 years ago today. And so I certainly would hope, and I do expect that there'll be even more traction 5 years from now. That being said, I think there'll still be a road ahead of organizations then. At the end of the day, this is a maturity thing. And so new companies that start up a few years from now might find themselves growing to a point where they should have a stronger program, and they don't. And they might not realize it until they have an issue, or perhaps a competitor of theirs or a partner of theirs has an issue, and that might get it to feel a little bit more real for them. So yeah.
Yeah, it's usually some kind of an incident. And I keep thinking of deep fakes that are going on right now, and people suddenly realize, and people like you have been talking, pounding on the table and saying, look at your threat exposure, look at your risk surface and adjust and make sure. And I think, maybe this is going to be the key differentiator of successful companies in the future, people that realize that artificial intelligence is automating attacks, and attacks are just going to be accelerated in the next 5 years. And you have to realize that if you can play that game, you have to have some kind of a defense for your company. Oh, good. Running out of time here. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Ben Scudera, Senior Director at Fortreum.